The air in the room was different. It wasn't just the hum of electricity or the low murmur of over 2,000 people shifting in their seats. It was something else, that heavy, invisible feeling you get when something historic is about to happen. The auditorium was packed, not a single empty seat. Security guards stood like statues along the back wall. Ushers whispered into radios. Media crews were stacked 3 rows deep. Boom mics hovered overhead like curious vultures. And the stage bathed in warm light, it looked almost serene. Almost. At the center stood the podium. It was simple. No flashy branding, just a sleek black platform split by 2 microphones and years of unspoken tension. To the left of the podium, towering in a tailored suit, stood Arnold Schwarzenegger. His jaw was tight, his back straight. The former governor, the global superstar, was in full control, or so he thought. He surveyed the room like a general preparing for war. To the right of the podium sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Her movements were minimal, her expression unreadable. But behind those still eyes was a storm waiting to be unleashed. The banner behind them read, "American Success Then and Now." How ironic. The event had been advertised for weeks. A cross-generational conversation about the American dream, they called it. But everyone in that room knew better. This wasn't a conversation. This was a showdown. And not just any showdown, one between legacy and reality, privilege and perspective, power and truth. As the crowd settled, phones lifted discreetly. Some were recording already. Others were live streaming, hoping to catch a soundbite, maybe even a takedown. But no one, not one single person, expected what would happen just 47 seconds after Arnold raised his voice. Because in less than a minute, the man who had played an unstoppable machine on screen would be stopped by a woman armed only with the truth. And this time there would be no dramatic comeback, no clever punchline, no action hero escape, just silence, in a room that would remember exactly where they were when the Terminator got terminated. On one side stood the icon, Arnold Schwarzenegger, a man who had defined masculinity for an entire generation, a man who turned muscles into millions movie roles, into influence, and a foreign accent into a symbol of ambition. His resume was the kind that made rooms go quiet, Mr. Olympia. Box office king, 2-term governor of California. A self-made immigrant who had risen from nothing, at least that's how he told it. And tonight he wasn't just here as a guest. He was here to deliver a lesson, to remind everyone what real success looks like. He stood tall, shoulders back, chin up, that signature voice gravelly heavy with command, ready to dominate. You could feel it, he expected to win. Not just the debate, the room, the story, the moment. But on the other side sat someone very different. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. No blockbuster movies, no golden trophies, no slow-motion entrances on red carpets. Just the steady, quiet presence of a woman who had fought for every inch of space she occupied. She wasn't famous for being on screen. She was known for what she did off camera, defending the voiceless in courtrooms, holding the powerful accountable, and walking into places where people who looked like her weren't supposed to be, and staying there. While Arnold was filming scenes with explosions, Jasmine was standing in courtrooms where the real bombs were words, verdicts, and systemic injustice. She wasn't dressed to impress. She was dressed for battle. Not flashy, just sharp. Her eyes didn't scan the crowd. They locked onto Arnold like she'd been waiting for this face-off her entire life. And in a way, maybe she had. Because for millions of Americans watching this, wasn't just about 2 people. It was about 2 Americas, one that had been told, yes, you can, and one that had been told, you'll have to prove it every day. On the surface, it looked like just another political panel, a polite discussion, a conversation about the American dream, then and now. But everyone who had lived a little longer, everyone who had seen the cracks in that dream, knew this wasn't just a talk. This was a collision. Not between 2 politicians, not between 2 egos, but between 2 Americas. Arnold represented the America that millions were told to believe in, the land of opportunity, where hard work alone could break any barrier, where success was measured in bank accounts, buildings, and boldness. He stood for the promise. But Jasmine, she represented the part of America that lives on the other side of that promise. The side where people work twice as hard for half as much, where doors aren't just closed, they're locked, where survival takes more than strength. It takes silence, strategy, sacrifice. To many watching this, wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning. Because for decades, one version of the American dream had been celebrated. The version with magazine covers, business empires, political campaigns. But the other version, the one with broken systems, unequal schools, generational trauma, that story had been silenced. Until now, and tonight in front of 2,000 live witnesses and millions more online, those two Americas were finally about to face each other, and only one would walk away unchanged. He leaned into the microphone with that familiar posture, shoulders squared, hands gripping the podium like he owned the room. Then he spoke. "I came to America with $7 in my pocket." It was the opening line, a line he had delivered hundreds of times in interviews, keynote speeches, even graduation ceremonies. And it always worked. Every time he said it, crowds would nod. Some would smile in admiration. Others would whisper, "That's the American dream right there." He continued, $7, that's it. And now I built companies, created jobs, starred in movies, became governor of the 5th largest economy in the world. The crowd stirred, some even applauded. It was a story people wanted to believe in, a man with nothing who rose to everything. And to be fair, it was impressive. Arnold's journey was remarkable. No one could deny that. But as he spoke, something started to shift, because tonight it didn't land the same way. Maybe it was the way he said it. So polished, so rehearsed, it almost felt too perfect. Or maybe it was the way his eyes occasionally flicked toward Jasmine, as if daring her to question his success. But the real problem wasn't the story. The problem was the tone. There was pride, yes, but there was also something else, a sharp edge, a challenge hidden inside the praise. As if he wasn't just telling his story, he was using it as a weapon. As if he were saying, "If I did it, why couldn't you? If I made it, then anyone can." No excuses. That's where the room started to split. Some still clapped, but others, they leaned back, arms crossed, and they waited. Because something in Jasmine's stillness suggested she wasn't going to let that slide. Arnold shifted his weight. His voice dropped half an octave, just enough to sound serious, deliberate, cold. He stared across the stage, and then without breaking eye contact, he raised his right hand and pointed. "Congresswoman Crockett, what exactly have you built?" The words landed like a gavel in a silent courtroom, sharp, public, final. It wasn't just a question. It was a punch thrown with words, and it came from a man who had spent decades being untouchable. He'd challenged studio executives, political rivals, even global leaders, and won. In his mind, this was no different. This was the kill shot. To him, Jasmine wasn't a match. She didn't have skyscrapers with her name on them, didn't have movies, medals, mansions. So how could she possibly stand toe-to-toe with him? That's what made this moment so powerful, because Arnold didn't just ask a question. He tried to define her worth by what she hadn't built, as if buildings meant more than broken barriers, as if real value came only in dollars, not dignity. His voice, steady and smug, sliced through the auditorium. "Tell me, Congresswoman, what companies have you created? How many jobs have you provided? What risks have you taken with your own money?" It sounded less like a question and more like an interrogation. His finger still pointed, his jaw clenched slightly. Already convinced she wouldn't have an answer good enough. He thought this was the moment he would win, but he didn't see the storm forming in her eyes. For a moment, the entire room stopped breathing. No coughs, no whispers, not even the usual rustle of shifting legs or nervous hands. Just silence, a long, heavy cinematic silence, the kind of silence that doesn't come from politeness, but from shock. Arnold's questions still lingered in the air like a blade thrown but not yet landed. "What have you built?" it echoed, in the marble walls, in the minds of everyone watching. Some leaned forward expecting stammering. Some leaned back expecting collapse. But Jasmine, she didn't move, not even a blink. She just looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something deeper, stillness. And in that stillness was power. Because when a room is that quiet, when all the noise dies, what remains is the weight of truth. And Jasmine knew something Arnold didn't. She knew that sometimes the most powerful answer is the pause that comes before it. You could feel it. The tension wasn't just in the air, it was under the skin, running down spines, tightening jaws. Jasmine didn't rush. She didn't fill the space with words. She simply allowed the silence to do what it does best, make people uncomfortable enough to listen. And Arnold, he had no idea that in the next few seconds, his carefully constructed empire of pride was about to crack. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't move in her seat. She didn't even blink. But when she finally spoke, you could feel the temperature in the room shift. Her words came out clear, precise, unshaken. "Governor Schwarzenegger," she began, her tone calm as ice, "I've built something you can't buy with all your Hollywood money trust. With the people I represent." The sentence landed like a quiet explosion. Not loud, but deep, like something that sinks into the floorboards and makes the walls shake anyway. Some people gasped, others held their breath. Because in just one line, Jasmine reframed the entire conversation. Arnold had spent the last 5 minutes bragging about what he'd built: companies, roles, political titles, fame. But she spoke of something no credit card could swipe. Something that didn't come with applause or headlines. She spoke of trust. Not just popularity, not just likes, but real, earned in the trenches, trust, the kind that comes from showing up when no camera is rolling. And more than that, she made something crystal clear. This wasn't just a debate about who had the bigger RSM. This was a debate about who had actually shown up for real people. And in that moment, you could feel something change. Arnold wasn't smiling anymore. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because some truths don't have to be shouted to shake the room. Jasmine looked at him, still calm, still steady, and asked, "When you came to America, did you ever fear being shot by police during a traffic stop because of the color of your skin?" The words hit harder than any insult, harder than any statistic, harder than any title, trophy, or dollar amount. The entire room shifted. Someone gasped. Someone else exhaled slowly. And Arnold, he froze. The man who had faced monsters on screen and political chaos in real life was suddenly just still. Because that question, it didn't attack his achievements. It exposed his blind spots. It held up a mirror not to his success, but to the invisible safety net beneath it. Jasmine's question wasn't meant to humiliate. It was meant to illuminate. And it did. Because the American dream, as Arnold knew it, had never included fear of a badge or a bullet for him. But for millions of others, that fear is where their American story begins. And in just one sentence, Jasmine made that contrast impossible to ignore. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She simply asked a question that demanded silence because there was no real answer that could defend the myth anymore. She could have stopped at one question, and it would have been enough. But Jasmine didn't stop, because one question can rattle a myth, but 3 can shatter it. Her voice remained calm, controlled. No drama, no theatrics. But each word was like a scalpel, sharp, clean, and devastatingly precise. "Governor," she said, "when you applied for business loans, did any bank ever look at you and assume you were there to rob the place?" The room tensed. "Then, when your children started driving, did you ever have to sit them down and teach them to keep their hands visible during traffic stops, just to make sure they came home alive?" Someone in the audience made a sound, not a word, just that small involuntary noise people make when they hear something too true, too painful to ignore. And then came the final blade. "When you were auditioning for roles, did any casting director ever tell you you looked too threatening to play a lead?" That was it. Not a monologue, not a rant, just 3 questions. 3 surgical incisions revealing wounds this country has hidden for too long, and the silence after each one spoke louder than applause ever could. Because Jasmine wasn't just speaking to Arnold. She was speaking to the idea that success is only about grit, and never about grit plus grace under gravity. She was speaking to everyone who had ever had to work twice as hard, speak twice as softly, and still be told it wasn't enough. At this point, it was no longer about Arnold. This wasn't about who had more success, who had more headlines, who had the louder voice or longer RSM. This wasn't personal anymore. This was structural, because what Jasmine just did, what she dared to do, wasn't to challenge a man. She challenged a myth. The myth that says if you work hard, you'll make it. That success is a staircase anyone can climb, if only they're willing to sweat enough. But what happens when that staircase doesn't start at the same floor for everyone? What happens when some people start in the basement with no light, no map, and are told to climb like everyone else? That's what Jasmine exposed. She wasn't arguing with Arnold. She was pulling back the curtain on a country that has sold a single version of the American dream, one that doesn't account for locked doors, loaded assumptions, or racial checkpoints. The audience felt it. You could see it in their faces. Some looked uncomfortable. Others were stunned. A few nodded slowly, silently, because they knew. They had lived it. This wasn't about an actor. This was about a system. And Jasmine. She wasn't attacking a man's accomplishments. She was pointing at what those accomplishments had never been forced to confront. In one scene, it couldn't be unseen. America loves to say, we're all playing the same game. But Jasmine, she calmly leaned in and made it clear. That's never been true. Because yes, we're all told to chase the same dream, to show up, work hard, play fair. But what happens when the rules aren't the same? What happens when one player starts with a trust fund, a clean record, and open doors, while the other starts with hand-me-downs, police suspicion, and locked gates? What happens when one player can fail, stumble, start over, and still be seen as resilient, while the other makes one mistake and is labeled a threat? Angry, dangerous Jasmine didn't need a whiteboard. She didn't need graphs or charts. All she needed was one truth: we're not just playing from different positions, we're playing by completely different rule books. In Arnold's game, you're rewarded for being bold, loud, and confident. In Jasmine's world, being too loud gets you labeled. Being too confident gets you punished. Being bold can get you hurt. Same game maybe in name, but not in play, not in cost, and certainly not in consequence. That's what Jasmine exposed, not just inequality, but a different set of rules entirely. And the scariest part, most people don't even realize which rule book they were handed until someone like Jasmine holds it up and reads it out loud. You could feel it, the shift. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. One woman in the front row began to cry quiet tears. No sobs, just the kind that fall when a truth hits a wound that's been buried too long. A man 3 rows back sat stone still, his mouth slightly open, eyes blinking like he was waking up from a long-held belief. In the far corner, someone stood up and clapped, alone, brave. And for a second, all you could hear was that one person's hands breaking the silence. And yet the room stayed mostly quiet. Not because people didn't want to cheer. Not because they didn't feel something. But because they did. Too much. Because when Jasmine's voice pierced through those myths, it didn't just reach their ears. It hit their hearts. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This wasn't politics as usual. This was truth, the kind that presses on your chest. The kind that makes you reevaluate what you thought you knew. The kind that makes you still. People weren't reacting to win an argument. They were reacting because they just heard something they couldn't unhear. Something too human, too honest. And in that silence, the weight of America hung in the air. For a man who built a legacy on strength, on command, on taking up space, Arnold stood still. No sound, no clever comeback, no signature smirk. Just silence. He wasn't speechless because of a lack of facts. He wasn't confused. He was witnessing something. For the first time in decades, Arnold wasn't the biggest voice in the room. He wasn't the most certain. He looked at Jasmine. And for a flicker of a moment, he didn't see a political opponent. He saw a mirror reflecting something America has long ignored. And he froze. Because how do you respond to something you've never had to survive? How do you argue with lived experience? You've never dared to imagine the lights above him burned hotter. The room around him pulsed with silence. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And in that exact moment, the legend of Arnold, the man of answers, power and control, cracked. Not shattered, not destroyed, but exposed. And sometimes being exposed hurts more than being defeated. I think I need time to process what you just said. That was all he managed. No punchline, no polished statement. Just those few stumbling words. From a man who had stood on global stages, who had delivered campaign speeches without a script, who had faced press rooms full of fire. This was new. He looked lost. Not embarrassed, not angry, just unsure. As if the ground beneath him had shifted. As if the world he thought he understood had just rewritten the rules without warning. For decades, he had been the one who explained America. Now he was being taught America. And it didn't feel like a lesson. It felt like a reckoning. Because when you've lived in certainty, your whole life, doubt hits like a thunderclap. And in front of 2,000 people under the glow of cameras, Arnold experienced what few ever see from a legend: unfiltered confusion. The screenshots spread within hours. Arnold, mouth half open. Jasmine, still as a storm before it breaks. And below the image, just 5 words. When privilege meets the truth, people shared it. Some laughed, some didn't. It wasn't a joke. This wasn't the kind of meme you send in a group chat to kill time. This was the kind you pause over, the kind you feel in your chest. For once, a meme didn't mock. It revealed. It revealed what happens when the American dream is held up like a trophy by one hand while the other hand never even got a chance to play. It wasn't viral because it was funny. It was viral because it was real. Because in a world addicted to noise, that single frame said everything. And suddenly people weren't sharing it to laugh. They were sharing it to say, this is what truth looks like when it lands. 10 million views in 24 hours. Not a pop song, not a celebrity meltdown. Just 5 minutes of truth. And in the comments beneath the flood of likes, shares, and stitched reactions was this. She said in 5 minutes what I've been trying to explain to my father for 5 years. It wasn't just about Jasmine. It wasn't just about Arnold. It was about every Thanksgiving dinner where someone bit their tongue, every classroom where a kid stayed silent, every hallway conversation cut short by let's not get political. This clip said it for them. Not with rage, not with hatred, but with clarity. And clarity goes viral. 20 hours later, Arnold posted no press release, no lawyered up statement. Just a caption on a black and white photo of the hearing. I've never feared the things so many others live with every day. No apology, but something deeper. A pause, a break in the armor, a recognition. From a man who had once believed the American dream was built by hard work alone came a sentence that admitted, maybe I had help I didn't see. Maybe their version of the game came with a different set of rules. The comments were a war zone. Some called him soft. Others called it the most honest thing he's ever said. And for the first time, Arnold didn't clap back. He didn't fight it. He sat with it. Sometimes the bravest thing a man like him can do is listen. Jasmine didn't post a victory video, didn't go on a media tour, didn't tweet a mic drop quote. She just showed up to a community town hall in East Dallas. No cameras, no red carpet. Just folding chairs, iced tea, and 42 people who looked like her and felt like her. When someone asked her, how did it feel to shut down Arnold Schwarzenegger? She didn't smile. She said, no one walks the same road. But if we really listen to each other, we might stop pretending those roads are equal. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to teach. And that's what shook people even more. She didn't celebrate the moment. She elevated it. In a world full of shouting, she chose clarity. In a world full of performance, she chose presence. Arnold Schwarzenegger walked onto that stage with everything. Fame, power, the mythology of a self-made man. He had faced wars on film, faced elections in real life, faced doubters, critics, and political storms. But nothing prepared him for the quiet, razor-sharp clarity of a woman who had no studio behind her, only truth. When he arrived, he was the legend, the American dream incarnate. People whispered, that's the Terminator, when he walked by. But when he left, they whispered something else. Did you see his face when she said that question about the police? It wasn't shame. It wasn't defeat. It was perspective. In a world where power often means never having to understand, that day he understood. And that changed everything. Jasmine never raised her voice. She never slammed the table. She didn't need to, because when truth walks into a room, even giants pause. She didn't break Arnold with anger. She broke the silence with something far more powerful, a mirror. A mirror that made people, millions of them, look not at her but at themselves. Suddenly, it wasn't just about two people on a stage. It was about a country that had forgotten how to listen, finally hearing itself again. She didn't win the moment. She changed it. And that moment is still echoing in classrooms and boardrooms, in dinner table arguments, between fathers and sons, between mothers and daughters. Her legacy is not noise. It's awakening. When you look at your success, do you ever wonder what obstacles you didn't have to face? Jasmine didn't ask it to win an argument. She asked it to open a door most of us didn't even know was there. It was the kind of question that doesn't fade after the applause. It follows you home. It sits with you at breakfast. It stares back at you when you're alone with your thoughts. For some, it was a sting. For others, a revelation. For all, it was a challenge. Because in that single sentence, she held up the blueprint of inequality and asked us to read it line by uncomfortable line. It wasn't about guilt. It was about awareness. And awareness is where change begins. In a world where success is often measured by titles, wealth, or fame, Jasmine reminded us of something deeper. Real strength is not just in what you've built, but in the obstacles you've overcome. We all have our own journeys, but not all journeys have the same starting line. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is to pause, listen, and understand a reality we've never lived, but others live every single day. The measure of a person is not how high they've climbed, but how they lift those still climbing. If this story made you pause, if it made you think about justice, empathy, and the courage to speak the truth, don't stop here. Subscribe to our channel for more stories the mainstream media won't tell you. We uncover the raw truths, the hidden voices, the moments that demand to be heard. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear one thing: you're not alone and you can stand up too.